Welcome back to the coverage of the National Day of Courage, the 100th anniversary of the birth of Rosa Parks. I'm here with a guest, Arlie Schardt, who has worn lots of different hats throughout history. Someone whose name I absolutely recognize.
Nice to meet you, Steve.
Most important, you were a correspondent for Time magazine in the South during that turbulent era of the 1960s when
That's right,
the civil rights movement was really gaining ground and momentum.
And when it hit that wonderful climax.
Right. So tell me about what that was. What was it like to cover those things as people were risking their lives and their livelihoods to make America better?
As a journalist, it was, and I'd speak for all the journalists, I think, who spent a lot of time in that era, the highlight of our lives, to see people, young people, older people, white and black, risking their lives for a cause, for a belief, for the chance to redeem the American dream, to achieve equality, equal rights, the right to vote, the right to public accommodations, and so on. And all of us, I've kept in touch with those who are still with us, and everybody agrees it was the most meaningful experience in his or her life.
Right. And it was often difficult, I know, for journalists covering that to separate their own sort of personal feelings. You're seeing really awful things happen to people that in some cases you had maybe gotten to know and care about. That must have been very difficult.
Well, I would say this, the media was constantly accused of bias in favor of the civil rights movement, especially by people in the South, by white people in the South. And I don't think that was true at all. You did not have to be biased. We did not have to slant our reporting. All you needed to do was report the facts on the ground. And all you needed to do was be accurate, and the story told itself. And people around the country, all around the country, were horrified, as I was. I was a kid from Wisconsin. I had no idea what life was like in the South, and coming down there was seeing an American apartheid. And it was shocking and stunning, and I couldn't understand how at age 29 when I got there that I didn't know what those conditions were like, nor did most Americans.
Most Americans did know, and that was really the role.
A very big lesson right there.
Well, and that was the important role that the media really played. I've heard it said before that once people sat in their living rooms and watched black children being sprayed with fire hoses, or watched police turn dogs on people who were not doing anything, it became more intolerable.
Well, you just couldn't imagine that this was going on and that the perpetrators were not being punished. But in those days, in many situations, whether it was Birmingham or Selma or Philadelphia, Mississippi, and I was at all those places.
You were,
I'd say that in general, the most nervous-making, sometimes fearful times were because of the police, because the police were so much in collusion with the racist leaders of their states that they were not enforcing the law. They were just there to enforce segregation. But not anything that we think of today as people's rights, individual rights. You said you were at Birmingham and Selma. Those were real turning points. I would say probably Selma. I mean, Birmingham was when people really began to see it on their television screens, and they had Bull Connor and the dogs and the fire hoses and all those horrifying scenes of women and children and so on being attacked and brutalized, and then but Selma probably was the national turning point, because for one thing, that's when President Johnson really got into the act. And I was with Dr. King the night that after the terrible bloody Sunday
on the Edmund
attack
Pettus
on the marchers, John Lewis and so on the on the Pettus Bridge in Selma. And LBJ gave an address a few days later, a nationwide televised address, and he closed it by saying, "We shall overcome."
Yeah.
And there were tears coming down Dr. King. So we were in a little home in Selma that was the home of a black dentist where Dr. King, he could have stayed in hotels, which he did sometimes, to make the point that it was a public accommodation.
Right, I have a right to
But when he really wanted to relax and just, unwind, he stayed with this dentist, and we saw it on a little fuzzy black and white screen, and when LBJ said, "We shall overcome," my God, it was just a moment.
Right. It was, I'm sure, moving, but also turned out to be prescient, right?
But that violence, of course, backfired completely, because 2 weeks later there were 25,000 people from all over America down to take part in the march from Selma to Montgomery.
Yeah.
And resulting in the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Passed, that's right.
And again, it was the tactical brilliance of President Johnson, who really knew how to deal with Congress.
Right, that's right.
That brought that about.
Yeah. Well, great to have you here. I'm sure it's
good to be here.
Moving for you to be here on this day.
This is a tremendous thrill.
Yeah.
I'd never had the privilege of knowing Mrs. Parks, but she was the spark plug.
She was the
one.
She did
set it off.
Absolutely.
And Dr. King came to Montgomery, and away we went.
Yeah. Okay.
The way
great
America went.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
Thank you,
Steve.